Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kara, and I am with the LTAP Center here at ODOT, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Today's webinar is Electric Vehicle Charging Infrastructure Plan, and we're thrilled to have Brianna Bedanes, Managing Director and Communications Policy, DriveOhio, as our presenter. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items to ensure a smooth webinar experience for everyone. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the questions panel on your screen. You can type questions there and we'll address them as opportunities arise throughout the session. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties or have any other issues, feel free to use the chat panel to communicate with our team, and we'll do our best to assist you. We'll also be sharing some useful resources and links throughout the webinar. You can access a copy of the PDF in the handout section. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all registered attendees within 24 to 48 hours after the session. All right, with that out of the way, let's get started. It's my pleasure to hand it over to Brianna. Brianna, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kara. As Kara said, my name is Brianna Bedanes, and I am the Managing Director of Communications and Policy for DriveOhio. For those that aren't familiar with DriveOhio and what we do, we are a division within the Ohio Department of Transportation that focuses on emerging transportation technology. So we cover all range of technology from connected and automated vehicles. We include electric vehicle technology as well as the air side with advanced air mobility and drones. So this program, the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Plan, fell squarely in our lap. This is something, though, that we have been planning for many years before this national funding program became available. We've been planning to looking at the state as a whole to see where those gaps in infrastructure or charging locations are and where we might need to plan for those in the future. So that was a great opportunity once the federal funding became available, that we kind of already had a draft plan in place where we wanted to hit the ground running. So today I'm going to go over just a little bit of EV trends, kind of set the stage internationally across the country, and then dig a little deeper into Ohio trends, talk about the federal funding programs, and then start talking about what's next once we get these first few rounds built out, where are our future priorities. I'll also talk about stakeholder outreach. We're in the midst of a lot of outreach for this program. Usually this time of year is where we do the most outreach, and with the future rounds that we have coming up, that outreach has increased even more. At the end, you'll have a QR code for a short survey to kind of just give us your thoughts and feedback. So we want to hear from you based on what resonated most with this presentation, as well as any thoughts that you have for our priorities for the future. So getting into the kind of setting the stage with the international and national trends, just to show that this isn't something that the US is only focused on. This is something that other parts of the country, actually, this industry is more advanced. So China, which historically internet companies kind of drove a lot of its economy, has recently shifted to EVs and EV batteries, driving a big part of their economy. China is now the world's largest market for EVs. 1 in 4 cars sold in China was electric or plug-in. Similarly, in Europe, a fifth of the new car registrations are now fully electric. Whoopsie. And then here in the US, we're not quite at the that level of adoption and sales that they are in other parts of the world, but in the past year, more than $92 billion worth of investments in EV and EV battery factories happened in the US. And that translates to about 80,000 new direct EV-related jobs in that same time frame. So some of those jobs are already existing and some of them are planned for the future with these new investments. So by 2026, US EV facilities will be able to make around 4.7 million new EVs annually. So here's a look at EV trends in the US. You can see that, we had a decent uptick starting kind of 2017, 2018, but it's really taken off the past couple of years. Right now, last year, about 1.4 million EVs were sold, and 73% of those are full battery electric. I should point out on this slide, BEV is full battery electric, and PHEV is plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So that means you can drive it with a regular gas engine, or you can plug it in and get a hybrid driving experience. So in Ohio, our adoption rate is also growing, and our adoption rate is the sum of all the new EVs divided by all the new registrations throughout the state. So in all of 2023, our adoption rate was at 2.7%. And so far in 2024, we're at 3.28%. These are the most popular EVs registered in Ohio. The first three represent about 2/3 of the registered EVs in Ohio. Tesla obviously has the biggest share at 43%, followed by GM and Stellantis at 11% each. So as we kind of dig a little bit deeper into Ohio data, we actually keep a dashboard on our website at DriveOhio, and this pulls data from the Ohio BMV that tracks vehicle registration. So the reason we do that is to keep track of the types of vehicles that are being sold, but more importantly, where those vehicles are being sold, so then we can match up where infrastructure is needed most to match where the higher density of EVs is. Long term, obviously, our plan is to build a network all across the state, but up until this point, the dashboard's been really helpful to kind of keep an eye on where those denser populations of EVs have been in the state thus far. I should also mention that the alternative fuel dashboard includes other types of fuel like liquid natural gas, hydrogen, not just electric, but primarily the biggest numbers that we see on that dashboard are attributed to electric vehicles. All right, so when we talk about charging levels, for anyone that's just not familiar with EVs or still kind of getting up to speed, we have a few different types. The type on the far left here, level 1, you can plug your EV into a regular outlet. It will charge at a very, very slow rate. So most people that purchase an EV will install this middle plug, a level 2 plug, kind of like a dryer or an appliance plug. It'll still charge at a slower rate over time, but it can usually charge your vehicle in the matter of hours instead of days. And so primarily, if you are just commuting to and from work or running some errands locally in town, you have an EV, a lot of your charging is able to be done at home. The program that I'm going to get into today focuses on this charging level on the right, which is DC fast charging. That stands for direct current fast charging. These are going to be very high-powered chargers. They can charge your vehicle in usually 20 to 40 minutes, depends on your battery, how much power it can receive. So there's a little bit of fluctuation there, but it's the most similar experience to stopping at a gas station. It's not quite as quick as filling up with gas, but we're trying to make the experience you know, a little bit quicker, where maybe you plug in, go inside and get something to eat, go to the restroom, and don't have to wait too long for your vehicle to be charged. So again, as I just mentioned, for you know, short local trips, most of your charging can be done at home. There's also some workplace charging where, you know, again, that can be a slower charge over multiple hours if you're leaving your car plugged in during the day. And then the NEVI program, which is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, really focuses on that fast charging at the top to enable long distance travel, travel across the state, travel across the country even. This is just another kind of breakdown of the types of trips and the level of chargers that would be needed for each type. Level 2, even longer trips up to 100, 200 miles if you can get somewhere like a destination charger and then plug in, charge your vehicle overnight and be good to go the next day, versus a very long trip, more than 200, 250 miles. You may have to stop and recharge mid-route. So when we look at the charging that exists today, here's kind of a picture of the number of ports and the number of stations. So think of a charging station would be like similar to a gas station, and a port would be like one gas pump. So at any gas station, there's usually at least 4 pumps, usually more than that. So that's the difference between the number of stations versus the number of ports. And so those are broken down into the red dots represent level 2 charging stations. Again, that's that slower charge over several hours. And then the green dots represent the fast charging stations. And then a handful of blue dots is kind of a combination of both. And this just shows you Ohio's overall power generation from 2004 to 2022 by fuel type. So you'll kind of note on this chart the decrease of coal from over 86% in 2004 to about 32% in 2022. And then contrastly, the increase in natural gas generation from less than 1% in 2004 to up to 51% in 2022. The clean and renewable green line includes nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, and geothermal energy. So as we start to think about this kind of transition, this transformation in transportation, and the types of economic opportunities and jobs that are available, workforce is a big part of the state strategy. By 2030, there'll be up to 25,000 jobs needed for EV-related careers. You can see kind of across the map, it's in all areas of the state, things that are already underway. Honda's retooling their existing plant for EV production. You've got the battery factory going in Fayette County, Honda and LG. Ford has a new EV manufacturing plant in Lorain County. So lots of opportunity to both transition our existing workforce into new skills and also train the workforce of the future as they start their careers and enter the workforce. So a couple training programs that are available in the state already. Tech Cred is a program that helps Ohioans learn new skills and helps employers build a stronger workforce. So the way that works is employees could get training for qualified programs, including EV ITP, which is the specialized training needed by electricians to be able to install electric vehicle charging stations. And then the employer would get reimbursed through tech cred for that training. And then IMAP is a similar program, but if you're not working with an employer, if you're just on your own trying to build up those skills individually, you would be reimbursed for that training individually. And so this kind of just shows what I mentioned earlier, the kind of three-step approach to how we look at building up the workforce. We're going to start, with our pre-K to 12 in schools with our STEM outreach, school visits, just awareness. A lot of these new transportation technology fields didn't exist 10, even 5 years ago. So the more visible we can make these careers, the better chance we have reaching the workforce in the future. So we're engaging pre-K to 12. We're working with career tech and higher education folks to prepare them for these careers. And then we're also, as I mentioned, upskilling the existing workforce by offering additional training, industry credentials to kind of transition them into this new field. So exposure to EVs increases the likelihood of the purchase, just like exposing students to these careers increases the likelihood of them to join these careers. So it's kind of all comes down to outreach and at multiple levels, from students, workforce, industry, government, businesses, all across the gamut, trying to keep up with this electrification trend. Any questions so far, Kara?
We do not have any questions so far. I think everyone is just learning, learning, learning.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to get into the specific federal funding programs and kind of where Ohio's progress has been in this space. So I mentioned we had done a lot of planning leading up to the NEVI program. So the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which is in the right column here on the screen, was part of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was passed a few years ago, and it provided in total $7.5 billion for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. That $7.5 billion was split up into $5 billion in formula funds that were distributed to all 50 states. And then the remaining $2.5 billion went into that column on the left there for discretionary grants for communities to apply for. Whoopsie. So of the $5 billion allocated to all 50 states, through the formula program, Ohio is due to receive $140 million, and that's over a 5-year period. We have the majority of that now as we move through implementing this program. And then the discretionary grant programs, we have the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant on the very left-hand side. That is open to governments, NPOs, at the local level, state level, regional level, to apply for. There's kind of two different tracks in that grant program. One is alternative fuel corridors, which those are designated corridors that Federal Highway Administration wants to be built out first. So they're just designated as, they're primarily interstates, major state and US routes that need to be built out first. So there's an extra pot of grant money for alternative fuel corridors, and then some additional funding for community charging. And that's where we see a lot of our local governments coming in with that local EV infrastructure planning. This is a funding option For some of that, community charging could be, at community central locations like a library or a rec center. In the first round, we did see a couple organizations from Ohio get awarded. NOACA, which is in Northeast Ohio, got awarded 15 million, and SOPEC, which is kind of southern, southeast, southwestern Ohio Energy Council, got 12 million for that program. And then the middle one that I haven't talked about yet is the Charger Reliability and Accessibility Accelerator Program. There's a lot of words to say. The program dedicates 100 million in total funding to repair or replace existing chargers that are broken. So in that first round, 2 million went to MORPC, which is the Central Ohio Regional Planning Commission. So just to give you kind of a picture of some of these discretionary grants that were awarded, the NOACA funds will go towards phase 2 of their electric vehicle charging station program. They began phase 1 last year to implement 40 charging stations across the Northeast Ohio region, and then phase 2, where this CFI funding will build out 63 more sites in Northeast Ohio. Similarly, SOPEC, which is Southern Ohio Energy Council, they will support 50 charging stations, and they'll have kind of a combination of level 2 and fast charging at their locations. So the 50 charging stations will break down into approximately 200 level 2 charging ports and 30 fast charging ports. So it's obviously a lot cheaper to put in lots of level 2 charging ports because it doesn't take the amount of power that a fast charging port would. And then,
And I do have a couple of
yep,
questions that have come in.
okay, sure.
The first one is asking, is there an inspection program for the installations to ensure that they are correctly and safely built?
That's a great question. Inspection is something we are sort of figuring out as we go, because at ODOT we're used to inspecting road construction projects, not necessarily charging station installation projects. So we have a contractor that is doing inspection for our NEVI stations. So I guess the short answer is yes, they need to be inspected. They need to ensure that they meet federal requirements since it is federal funds going towards these programs. I don't know that there's a whole lot in terms of standards out there yet, but it's kind of something as we're building as we learn more and get further into this program.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
We also have someone that asked, in the slide showing the US EV trends by year, how
Mhm.
many months into 2024 was that data taken? They want to be able to estimate what 2024 might
Sure.
end up looking like for those BEVs and PHEVs.
Yep, let me go back to that real quick. The data is through April of this year. So we get at the end of the month, it takes a couple of weeks, so it's through April of 2024.
Fantastic, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, we've got another one. Does the repair program cover stations that were damaged through copper theft? It seems maybe that's been maybe a concern.
I don't know specifically. I'd have to check on that and get back. But my understanding is any station that is non-operational is eligible to be repaired through this program.
Okay, wonderful. Let's see here. Many folks have been hesitant to transition to an EV due to range anxiety.
Mhm.
Now there is increased concern about EV charging stations being out of service due to vandalism. such as theft of charging cables. What's being done to prevent damage to the EV charging stations?
Yeah, so I think you've mentioned a lot of challenges with the charging ecosystem currently and with implementing this program. The program's created to alleviate that range anxiety, but we've done a lot of outreach with folks throughout the program thus far, and it's very clear that it's not enough to just have these charging stations located every 50 miles if they don't work or we can't rely on them being working when we need them. So that thought goes into a lot of our evaluation of the proposals we receive. So we're looking for these stations, I should mention, are built on private property. So they're not within ODOT right of way. They're going to be at retail establishments, gas stations, hotels, restaurants. So the thought there is that somebody will be on site most of the time. The private companies are responsible for operation and maintenance, and the requirements state that the station has to be reliable. It has to be in working order 97% of the time minimum. So we will receive that operational data from each charging station to ensure that it meets that reliability. If it does not meet the reliability, we've taken some measures to hold back funding to try to encourage compliance that way. So there's not really a one size fits all for that, but we're kind of trying to layer on multiple approaches to ensure reliability in terms of vandalism and theft. We're looking for stations that have a security plan, are well lit, make people feel safe to stop at. So um, that's what I've got for that one.
Okay. We have one last one.
Mhm.
Um, Someone is asking if there's going to be any state funding for the fire departments to help with any problems that may arise from the EVs.
I am not sure about funding. That is something our team's currently looking into now. It's a little bit outside of ODOT's scope directly, but certainly something that we would like to be able to pass on to our local partners and first responders if there's any sort of training that can be offered for if electric vehicles catch fire on the roadway, what are the precautions that are different versus gas-powered vehicles. In general, research shows that electric vehicle fires happen far less often than gas-powered vehicle fires, but when they do happen, it burns hotter, it's harder to put out. So that's a consideration that we're looking into. I don't think there's funding dedicated to that yet, but that I wouldn't be surprised if something came down the line following this program.
Okay, thank you, Brianna. We don't have any more questions.
Okay. So going into these discretionary grants, the MORPC $2 million grant, this is to repair and replace broken chargers. They will repair an estimated 175 existing but non-operational chargers. And then the NEVI program, the formula funds that ODOT is implementing. So again, this is 140 million that Ohio has to implement over 5 years. And the way this works is these are public-private partnerships. So we provide 80% of that funding via the federal program, and then 20% is contributed by the private developer. The blue lines on the map here are the alternative fuel corridors that I mentioned a little bit ago. Those have to be built out first. So what built out means is we have to have a station at least every 50 miles along those blue routes. Along the routes, the stations have to be within 1 mile of the route, so they can't be, more than 1 mile off the freeway. Oopsie. Other requirements are each station has to have 4 ports available at each station so that they can charge 4 vehicles simultaneously. And each port has to have 150 kilowatts. So that means a total station would have to have at least 600 kilowatts. So these are very, very high powered chargers. Even a lot of the fast chargers that exist in Ohio today do not have that level of power. Only 13 of them met NEVI requirements before the program began. So that kind of gives you an idea of the level of experience that this program is trying to build out. So we're starting with these blue routes, the alternative fuel corridors, which again are primarily interstates. And then you'll see some major state and US routes. And then once those are built up to every 50 miles along those routes, then we can use the remaining of our 140 million to start filling in the gaps. The funding becomes more discretionary. We can address state priorities. We can fill in, particularly there's big gaps in Southern Ohio, Northwest Ohio, and just kind of the more rural areas to get a more consistent spacing for stations across the state. So this illustrates kind of our strategy based on procurement rounds that we've done thus far. So round 1, we focused on interstate alternative fuel corridors. So you can see the blue dots represent 23 stations that we're building as part of round 1. Then round 2 does a little bit more interstates, but also some state and US route alternative fuel corridors. Those will be another 22 locations, and we just announced the selected locations for round 2 earlier this week or last week. And then to get a full build out of the alternative fuel corridors, we'll be doing what we're calling round 2B, which will just fill in those additional locations along the alternative fuel corridors that we need to meet that spacing requirement. So you can also see there's a column that says the percentage of disadvantaged communities. So that tells you how much of the benefits are going towards disadvantaged communities for each round. And then likewise, how much, when you consider the 25-mile coverage per station, how much of Ohio is covered for each round. So by the time we build out the alternative fuel corridors, we should have about 94% coverage within that 25-mile range. So recap for round 1, Ohio was really leading the charge, pun intended, for the NEVI program the whole way. This was rolled out to all 50 states at the same time, and our strategy was we wanted to get out there at the front of the line, anticipating some potential supply chain issues. All 50 states kind of vying for the same equipment, the same companies and contractors. We wanted to be at the front of that line to get these stations in the ground as quickly as possible. So we were the first state to put out a request for proposals and begin procurement, the first state to break ground, and then ultimately opened the very first NEVI funded station in the country in December of last year. This station is located at I-70 and US 42. It's at a pilot gas station, and it features EVgo chargers. There's kind of a partnership between Pilot EVgo and GM Energy, which you can see in the picture there to show you what that looks like. So as we look ahead to future investment, I showed you the chart of kind of the first 3 rounds, 1, 2, and 2B, to get our alternative fuel corridors built out. That takes us to around 58 million, which is only 42% of our funding. So that means once our alternative fuel corridors are built out, then we'll have roughly 58% of the funding left over to use in a more flexible or discretionary fashion. So that's kind of the stage we're at now as we're planning for round 3 and beyond, trying to shore up what the state priorities are, taking into consideration local plans. We're meeting with all sorts of folks to try to come up with a cohesive state strategy that covers communities as well as the state without duplicating efforts. So when we look at overall program goals, big goal is to get 90% of Ohio residents within 25 miles of a NEVI funded charger. In doing that, we have to consider equity, make sure that that technology is accessible, implement it in a fiscally responsible way, and then, like I mentioned before, track the data, track the reliability to make sure that we're meeting customers' needs. So when we consider equity, Justice 40 is laid out through the U.S. Department of Transportation, meaning that this program has to deliver 40% of the federal investment to disadvantaged communities. So you can see on this map where the disadvantaged communities in Ohio is. We've got about 28% of Ohio's population located in a disadvantaged community, and 22% of Ohio's land is in a disadvantaged community. Some more equity considerations relate to air quality, smog and pollution. So we have some counties in Northeast Ohio as well as a couple in Southeast Ohio that are in non-attainment zones, which basically just means the air quality is not ideal. So we can consider that when we think about where to put these stations and how that might benefit the air quality in those locations. So as we look ahead to kind of future rounds, now that we can get off interstates, get off those major routes in round 3 and beyond, these are the types of charging that we are looking at. So we will still have some major routes, some redundancy there, community charging, destination charging, freight, and other. So when we talk about major routes, this is basically going to provide some resiliency and redundancy on interstates, major state and US routes, so that folks have options where to stop. If there are any electric vehicle drivers in the audience now, you can attest, or you've heard from your constituents that if you're taking a road trip across Ohio, you have to plan very carefully so that you have a place to stop when you need to refuel. So the idea behind creating some redundancy on major routes is that you have more options where you can travel more conveniently. So we'll take a look at not only redundancy on those alternative fuel corridors, but other major routes, charging hubs for intercity travel. Community charging, and this could be a combination of fast charging and level 2 depending on community needs. We're looking for convenience, economic development, and then this is a great opportunity for us to focus on underserved areas and disadvantaged communities. A lot of EVs today will route you if you put in your final destination, and it'll kind of route you where you need to go to be able to charge along the way. And so if your community doesn't have a charging station, it's sending EV drivers around your community. So it could, by introducing charging stations into communities across Ohio, it could really create an economic development opportunity as folks start to stop in those communities that were previously avoided, spend a little bit of time there while their vehicle is charging. Destination charging, this would be places where you're going to go spend a few hours. So it could be parks, it could be amusement attractions, museums, somewhere where you can go park your vehicle, go inside or go ride some rides for a few hours and then come back out. Your vehicle will be charged and ready to go. Some considerations with the destination charging is matching funds. As I mentioned, 80% of these costs are covered by the federal funds, and then there's a 20% match required. So when we're working with private businesses, that means the developer kicks in 20%. But if we start to look at maybe putting some of these charging locations in state parks or other publicly owned properties, we have to think about where that 20% match is going to come from. Map overlay with other agency programs. Again, we want to make sure that we're working in alignment with other planning efforts, that we're not trying to duplicate infrastructure efforts. Grid capacity is another thing that we hear about all the time. We don't have a direct role in upgrading the grid, but what we do work with utility companies quite a bit to have them sort of, they take a look at the locations that we know we need a charger, and they'll let us know if there are any red flags in terms of getting power supply or getting enough power to those locations, so we can consider that in our planning efforts. Freight charging, we're not quite there yet as a state in doing a large concerted effort for freight charging, but that's certainly a consideration for this program, where we could consider fleets of trucks that are transitioning to electric, and where we might be able to put truck stop charging or port charging where our freight vehicles are going to stop along the way. And then other types of charging, we have, there's mobile charging available. So that would be, we have to start to think about if electric vehicles, if you run out of gas, you're stalled, you can walk to a gas station, somebody can bring you a little bit of gas to get to the next exit. If an electric vehicle stalls, it's not quite as easy as bringing out a can of gas. So there are mobile charging setups where, it might be a battery truck that comes to your location to charge you where you are. Transit and ride sharing charging stations, as we start to think about public transportation and folks that don't own a vehicle, what some charging options might be for them. Any questions thus far?
We do have a few more questions.
Okay.
We have, and this is from the same person. So they were asking, how much do the chargers cost in general, and how are the rates set?
Great questions. So we budget around $1 million per station for the fast charging stations. The first couple rounds that we've awarded, we've seen it come in a little bit under $1 million per station, and it will depend on developer, what power is available, where the station even on their property is located. That impacts the cost a little bit, but it's around $1 million per station for fast charging. I don't have the cost off the top of my head for a level 2 charging port, but it's much cheaper than that. And then the rates that people pay to charge are set by the vendor. So right now there's no sort of regulation from the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio or anyone else that sets those rates. They're set solely by the vendor. So we have heard feedback from folks thus far, because there are not a lot of options currently, that there might be some instances of price gouging where if it's the only charging station available for 100 miles, the price for kilowatt is a little bit higher, or a lot bit higher in some cases. So we're hoping that as this infrastructure network gets built out and there are more options, that the market will sort of regulate itself in terms of rate.
Okay, thank you. That looks like there was a good, because we had one about stations being, so the stations are not free of charge. Let's see here. That one, okay. Are there any requirements for this funding to have renewable power generation percentage?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And last question. Um, is that $1 million for a 4-port fast charge station or $1 million for each port minimum for required?
Good question. It's for a 4-port station. So it's for one location that includes at least 4 ports.
Great. Thank you so much. That's all we have for now.
Okay. Now my screen seems to be having some difficulty, so let me get us back to where we're going. Maybe. Okay. So stakeholder outreach. I mentioned this time of year is a very busy one for us because we have to, as part of this federal requirement, federal program rather, we are required to update our state electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plan annually. So that update is due August 1st of each year. So we usually spend May, June, July updating that plan and then going out to various different groups and the public to get feedback on changes to the plan, future candidate locations that are new since last year. We're also coordinating with our fellow state agencies like the Public Utilities Commission, Department of Agriculture when it comes to weights and measures, Environmental Protection Agency. They also have some EV charging grant funding that they've been executing over the past several years. So trying to coordinate with them to ensure we can use the funds, maximize the funds for Ohio rather. So coordinating with lots of state agencies, coordinating with metropolitan planning organizations, regional transportation planning organizations, and also adjacent states. So as we plan our spacing requirements, everything I showed you today does not consider the charging that's happening in other states. So we could have something right across the state line that'll give folks even more option, but we are trying to work with them so that we're aware of what they are putting in. Technical partners, the unique thing about this program is that the industry and the companies that we're working with are not used to working with government, not used to bidding on government projects. So there's been a pretty high education factor in terms of, how the federal process works, and just kind of building that working relationship as they start to do more of these federally funded projects. We'll do outreach to the public. We have 6 in-person public meetings and 2 virtual public meetings planned next month, and I'll show those on the screen here in just a second. And then equity considerations. So part of that's working with our local stakeholders and our local communities to get their input and rely on their expertise to consider those groups. And then one cool thing we did in December is we actually hosted an equity workshop, and we invited representatives from all over the state, various different communities, different backgrounds. We had some public housing representatives, some electric vehicle advocates, local governments, and really just met to consider equity as we move into these future rounds, where the charger should be, what was most important to different communities, what information needed to be shared with those communities. So it really helped us come up with ideas on how to move forward and kind of co-create those solutions once we're off the prescriptive alternative fuel corridors. So what we've heard thus far from the equity workshop, as well as the public outreach we've done thus far, amenities are huge. The station I showed you that we opened in December, it had kind of a canopy over it, just like you'd see at a gas station over gas pumps. I have learned that that is not common for charging stations. So that's huge. It's what EV drivers want to protect them from weather, better lighting, trash cans. We heard a lot about trash cans not being available when people stop to charge. So that's something we'll consider when we get proposals from teams, is what amenities they have available. We also heard to consider impact on the electric grid, which I mentioned earlier, on how we try to coordinate with utility companies, consider disadvantaged communities, and plan some intentional outreach. So we're in the process of that, of trying to, really not just saying, okay, here we are, come to us and get this information, but trying to go to them and get the information to them intentionally so that they can spread it with their community. Leveraging different funding opportunities to expand charging across the state, increasing reliability and standardization. I don't think I mentioned when it comes to standardization, these stations are required to have what's called a CCS connector, Combined Charging Systems connector. So that connector will charge pretty much any electric vehicle on the road today except for Tesla. Tesla has their own charger that was proprietary until recently. Right after this program kicked off and started, they opened up their connector so that other auto manufacturers could move and use that connector if they chose to, and pretty much almost every automaker has announced their intention to make the switch in the next couple of years. So I think that's one way we'll also see this program evolve. Is right now we have to have that CCS connector, and that'll charge the vehicles that are on the road today. But if we want to future-proof these stations, we're going to need to have some sort of dual connector to have both options available. So these are the public workshops that I mentioned. We've got 6 throughout the state in person in different regions, as well as 2 virtual. So you can refer to the PDF to get more information on this, if you want to share the specifics for the meeting in your area. And then happy to take some more questions, but I'd also like, if you don't mind, to take this very short survey. It's only 2 questions. And I think Kara's going to put the link in the chat as well, or you can hit the QR code. And just the 2 questions are: what resonated most from today's conversation, and what suggestions do you have for future conversations? Feel free to share whatever you'd like in those. We are looking forward to getting that feedback. So before I go to the next slide, Kara, are there any other questions?
We have just one more question.
Okay.
And they were asking if there's an expected time frame for when round 1 of the build out will be completed.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're expecting most of the stations from round 1 to be complete by the end of this year. We currently just have that 1 station operational, but we have 11 from round 1 under construction right now, and are actually expecting 2 to 3 of those to be activated and open within the next couple of weeks. So you'll start to see kind of a trickle effect of the opening of them start very, very soon, and hopefully continue consistently for the next several years. But round 1, we're expecting to have them operational by the end of this year. And then we just announced the next locations, the selected locations for round 2. Those would follow, and expect them to be constructed next year.
Wonderful. We have a question where the asker wants to know, can the private developer collect a profit for these?
Yes. Yes, so these stations, as I mentioned, are built on private property. They're operated and maintained by the private company as well. So they can make a profit for the charging. They're required, the program requires operation and maintenance that's overseen by ODOT for 5 years. And then at the end of the 5 years, then it's their charger, and they are responsible for it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Um, are the meetings that you spoke about for the general public, or should planning partners attend?
Definitely both. They're for the general public, but I will say the times are primarily during business hours, so they're more conducive to local partners and the business community attending, which is why then we added those virtual meetings. One of them at least is in the evening, so they're open to any and all that are interested in electric vehicle charging.
Wonderful. Um, so far, that might be the end of our questions. We don't have any more in the queue.
Okay. So this is my last slide. Just kind of a few things that you can do to help us out as our partners that we very much appreciate is share the information for those public meetings. We have a rundown of them on our website, and then you can also refer back to the slides to get that list. If you do have any electrification plans or infrastructure deployment plans in your local or regional areas, if you would connect with DriveOhio so that we can make sure that your plan, we're aware of your plan when we're making ours rather, so we can align those. Any future funding opportunities, future rounds of grants, or requests for proposal will be listed on our website. And if you hit that QR code on this slide, that'll take you to our email list that you can sign up for to get updates on electric vehicle infrastructure, our plan, and any other information that ODOT puts out about the NEVI program. And so that's all I've got. Thank you so much for your time. Happy to answer a few last questions if there are any. Otherwise, thank you.
Yeah, so I will leave the question box open just for a few more moments. To anyone else that's ready to go, I just wanted to say that, as I mentioned earlier, the recording of this webinar will be shared with all the registered attendees. I will also be sending out the link to the PDF, as well as the links to the survey and the sign-in or the sign-up. So thank you for attending, and we hope you found this webinar informative and engaging. Have a wonderful rest of your day.